Hello and welcome to the Capital Market. I'm Edidiong Iwang. Unclaimed dividends remain one of the recurrent issues that continue to rear its head in the capital market. Now, this has remained on the front burner of public discourse in the past few years, especially among stakeholders. The figure, which stood at 185.44 billion naira at the end of 2019, has been on the rise despite the introduction of the e-dividend, which was introduced by the Securities and Exchange Commission in 2015. Well, I'm being joined by Bode Ayeku, the president of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, to talk about this and more. Good evening, sir. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
The Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria recently raised an alarm on the high rate of unclaimed dividends. What is your position on this?
We are concerned that the volume of unclaimed dividend is rising, and it's rising on an annual basis. Fortunately, just 2 weeks ago, the Securities and Exchange Commission reported that it increased by 32% between 2018 and 2019. And it's a trend that must not continue. As you are aware, this is the season of AGMs. Companies are declaring dividend. So the more they declare the dividend, the higher the unclaimed dividend. And that is why we need to do something urgently. We should consider it as an emergency, a national emergency that we have to focus on solutions. And the reason is this. If you look at the volume of unclaimed dividend currently, it's even higher than the entire budget of some states. And there are a lot of Nigerians that are poor, that have money in this particular pool. And we just need to fish them out, encourage them to get their money so that we can drive down the volume.
So what solution is the Institute proposing to manage this?
Various solutions based on the fact that we need to segment what are the reasons why we're having this huge volume. Segmentation shows clearly that the procedure we have currently is very complex. The procedure is such that when you have your unclaimed dividend, if you visit the portal of the Securities and Exchange Commission, it pops all the companies where you have the unclaimed dividend. However, you need to approach the registrars. You fill a form for each registrar, and then the registrar will now manage the process. For example, if you have unclaimed dividend in 5 companies, managed by 5 different registrars, you need to fill 5 forms. And this is absolutely unnecessary. What is required of the Securities and Exchange Commission is to design a very simple form, whereby any shareholder approaching the system will just put in all the companies where he has unclaimed dividends, and then the system will integrate it in such a way that maybe a registrar will complete his process within a particular period of time, maybe maximum of 3 days, and forward to the next registrar. Or simultaneously, that particular form should be disseminated to all the affected registrars, instead of just doing it on a case-by-case basis. It's so complex and it's so demoralizing. That is one leg of it. The other leg is also that there must be time frame within which this particular process must be completed by the registrar, and for shareholders visiting the banks, by the banks, so that this particular process is done quickly. The other problem that we have identified is that a lot of the shareholders also are deceased. And unfortunately, the law is that you must have a probate or letter of administration in order for you to access this particular money. And we have a very complex probate system in Nigeria. In fact, I describe the process as punitive, complex, and unfair. It's like you are punishing the debt. For example, somebody has died, and they need to access his unclaimed dividend. You now say you need to value the shares. On what basis are you valuing the shares? They are not selling the shares. We are talking about transmission of shares, not sale of shares. Yes. But you need to value if it's listed on the stock exchange. They need to reckon with the current value. Even if the person bought it some years ago and the price has moved up or down, you pay based on the valuation. And for me, or generally for the Institute, what we feel is that the valuation system is just unfair to them. It should be based on the quantity of shares that the person has. If you have 10,000 units, you pay 10,000, that is 1 naira per unit, instead of you paying a higher amount based on valuation. For example, if the valuation is done now, and thereafter maybe the price of a particular stock has crashed, the government will not refund you. So it's so punitive. And unfortunately, when you are processing letters of administration or probate, it includes your shares, your property, and the same valuation process is also applicable by the probate registry, in which case they value your building. Maybe they look at the story building, go and the valuation is 10 million, and then you start negotiation. And whenever you have negotiation, there's subjectivity. Whenever there is subjectivity, there is corruption in the process. What I think the government should do, and that is why I do not think that it's fair for you to be asking dependents of deceased to be paying something like 10% of the value of the asset, what they should do normally is that, for example, in Lagos State or states where we have the land use charge, they should just reckon with what is the land use charge, the annual land use charge of that property. That is the maximum amount that particular, those who are processing the probate should pay to the government. Because you ask yourself the question, if the government says that the property is worth 10 million, then if we offer it to the government, can the government buy it at 10 million? The question is, the answer to that is no. Okay. So what we should do is to simplify the process of probate in such a way that it can be done quickly by the dependents. And the other side of it is that a lot of the dependents processing the probate and letter of administration, they do not even have the money to pay the 10% to the government. And that is where we want the Security and Exchange Commission to work with the chief judges of all the courts in such a way that just a letter written by those who are processing the probate to the bank to say, bank, whenever we are through with this process, this probate process, please release so amount of money, which is whatever is due to the government, straight to the probate registry. In which case, the government has an assurance that this money will come. But the challenge as at now is that you must pay the money in advance before you get the probate. We want it to be reversed in such a way that just a letter from the proposed administrators to the bank, authorizing the bank to pay the government, will be sufficient in respect of that. And apart from that, we're also proposing that in respect of the multiple applications, during the banking consolidation, a lot of people applied in multiple names, and unfortunately, some of them have forgotten how it has been done. What is to be done is that SEC should continue with this process, whereby a moratorium is given, you encourage them to come up and then claim whatever is due to them. If that continues, we are very sure that will be solved. However, the last one is this, going forward. Shares are still being issued. There are applications for new issue. There are rights issues. But the challenge is that now that we know that the volume of unclaimed dividend is increasing, what we should do is that we should have a default beneficiary in the application form that is being filled now. So that if a person, for example, a husband is buying shares, he should put the name of the next of kin, maybe the wife or the children, so that immediately the husband dies, dividend will be paid automatically to the default beneficiaries. Okay. And we will not be stuck in this process of paying processing letter of administration before we assess it. So these are some of the solutions we are proposing that the CBN, the Security and Exchange Commission, and the relevant stakeholders in the capital market should actually try to imbibe, and then we reduce the volume.
But how would you describe the current efforts made by the regulator in handling unclaimed dividends?
It is commendable, particularly that of the SEC and CBN. However, there is room for improvement. Okay. And the reason for that is this. The biggest room in the whole world is the room for improvement. What SEC needs to do now is to, as I said, simplify this form in such a way that one form will be enough for a shareholder to run whatever unclaimed dividend he has in the system. That is one. CBN also needs to work closer with the banks. CBN has tried in the past to give the banks timeline within which they need to process any request for unclaimed dividend, so that it is done within a prescribed timeline. I don't see the reason why it should not be concluded within 3 days. And that is one leg of it. The other leg is that even when the registrars and the banks are processing, they will still need to go through NIPS, Nigerian Interbank Settlement System. NIPS also should work within a particular time frame. So that whenever the forms are processing are concluded, they will also pay promptly. If that is done, that would be fantastic. And the most important thing is that both SEC and CBN, they also need to have an urgent conversation with the High Court judges, that is particularly the Chief Justice and the Attorney General of the state, in such a way that they fashion out a procedure to simplify the processing of probate.
Probate, yes, sir.
If something is not done urgently, that particular leg will continue to create a permanent problem. So they just need to quickly agree on that and find a way to manage that. And going forward, there's a bigger problem that I see that a lot of us are not even addressing now. Is the problem of all these unclaimed dividends we are talking about, they're in the banks. Okay. So what happens when there is a distress in the bank? Who is liable? The registrar keeps the money there. The ones that are returned to the company also, the funds are kept there. So if there is a distress in the bank, is there a guarantee that that money will be recovered? Because the challenge as at now is that NDIC, there is a limit to which the insured sum is about 500,000. So if, for example, unclaimed dividend of this billion, 2 or 3 banks, there are issues with the bank, what happens? So the NDIC and SEC, they need to work together can they increase the sum insured? Or can they have something like a safety net in such a way that even if there is a problem, the shareholders, whenever they come up, they will be able to get their money? I don't foresee a situation whereby the company that has released this fund will now be requested now to pay again because a bank has collapsed. So we need to work on that. While working on the current problem, we need to proactively also address this future problem, which is real. We know what happened in the 90s when some banks collapsed,
Yes,
and
sir.
then we just need to quickly do that.
There's a proposal for unclaimed dividends to be kept with registrars for a 12-year period, and instead of the current, regulation of keeping it for 15 months. Now, this means that registrars are to return unclaimed dividends to companies after 15 months. What is your view on this proposal?
I don't support the proposal. In fact, it's a disaster waiting to happen if government should make a mistake of accepting that. And the reason is very simple. The law as at now, which is the Companies and Allied Matters Act, Section 382, provides that the money should be returned to the company after 15 months. SEC rules very clear on that, it's 15 months. And apart from that, it is the companies that the dividends are declared by companies, not by the registrars.
So it should return to the company.
To the company. Apart from that, the registrar are just agents of the company. And in any case, within the period of 12 years, the ultimate person that is liable for the payment of dividend to the shareholder is the company, because the shareholders apply to the company for the shares, not to the registrar. So I do not subscribe to that proposal that it should be taken to the registrar. Has no stake in this business. They are just agents. They are just facilitators. And it is better for the company. Karma provides for what will happen to the money when it is returned to the company. The money cannot be invested by the company in the operations of the business. The money must be invested outside the business. And the reason for that particular provision is to ensure that even if the company has issue in future, that money is intact, and that particular process will continue. And if we progress that discussion along that line, if the money is kept by the registrar for 12 years, if anything happens to the money, who will be liable? The registrar or the government? So it's not a proposal that should be supported, and it's a proposal that must be resisted because it's not in line with the law.
The Securities and Exchange Commission and the National Information Technology Development Agency recently collaborated on data protection in the capital market. Do you get a sense of respite in the level of unclaimed dividends through this synergy?
Yes, definitely the whole purpose of NICDA, working with relevant stakeholders, and the recent guideline they issued, they released for public entities, is to ensure that the data of stakeholders in the market, not only the capital market in Nigeria, will protect the data of those stakeholders, and also to manage identity issue. Because unclaimed dividend, the major challenge is that a lot of people also, they try to play smart to get something that does not belong to them. And that is the reason why NICDA is now interfacing with the SEC and also the capital market operators on the need for them to protect the identity of stakeholders so that they manage it properly in such a way that it's only the legitimate owners of this particular unclaimed dividend that will have access to it, and there won't be any abuse of the data of the stakeholders in the market. And I support that. It will have an impact. Particularly, it will ensure that only the legitimate owners of those particular unclaimed dividends that will be entitled to claim them.
Okay, so then what is your assessment of the multiple share subscription unification program?
It is progressing well, unfortunately slowly. And the reason is that a lot of those who apply for these shares during the banking consolidation era, they've forgotten about it. And the major problem is this. If you recall, in the 90s, early 2000s, we have about 100 banks in Nigeria. Currently, we have about 20-something banks. And you can hardly trace the corporate lineage of a bank now. Corporate lineage is saying that for an individual, you can trace your lineage to your state, to your family. Some of these banks, if you mention, for example, you mention EcoBank. EcoBank acquires some banks along the line. Those who apply for those shares 15 years, 20 years ago, they cannot link that company, the bank then, to EcoBank. So anytime they talk about multiple application, people say, okay, the bank I bought the shares, it has collapsed. But they've forgotten that those banks have something like a relationship with the current bank. So what I think should be done now is for the stakeholders, particularly SEC, to do a mapping of the existing banks to where they started from, which banks have they acquired, including insurance companies. So insurance companies also were acquired in the process. So that when I see, for example, a first bank, I can see how which other entities were absorbed by first bank, and then we can start tracing back. Apart from that,
so you need to hold your thoughts on that. We'll continue this conversation when we return from the break. Stay with us. Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us on the program. Bode Ayeku, the president of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, is still with us on the program. Before we went on that break, you were giving us your assessment of the multiple share subscription unification program. So could you just continue with that?
Okay. So basically, what I was trying to say is that we just need to find a way to ensure that we encourage people to know what happened, where they have invested. And as I said, what we need to do is that let's do a corporate lineage so that we can see the current banks, the current insurance companies, which other entities they absorb, so that people at a glance could see. And apart from that, nothing stops the capital market from having a capital market day. We then call it unclaimed dividend sensitization day. In which case, we encourage a lot of people to get to visit this particular portal to say, did you buy shares 15 years ago during banking consolidation or during insurance consolidation? Go to portal so that you can know whether you have outstanding dividend or not. Because if we do not address that, that will be a block in the sense that nothing will touch that particular percentage of unclaimed dividend, except somebody is able to access it. He will not be able to claim the previous dividend and future dividend. And if we do that, we encourage them. Maybe churches also, nothing stops us, churches, mosques, centers,
create awareness,
create that awareness. Let's have one national day for that particular program, and let's encourage a lot of people to just come up so that they take this particular benefit. It is painful that we have a lot of people that we say are poor, but they have funds somewhere which they cannot access for circumstances beyond their control. So let's encourage them, and that's why I said the other time, let's simplify the process. The process we have as at now can be improved upon, and if we do that, that will really assist.
In your view, how do you think we can track the progress made to reduce unclaimed dividends?
It is very simple. The starting point is timeline. Let's agree on timeline within which certain things will be done. Timelines within which the registrar will work on claim dividend receipt. Timeline within which banks will work on the claim dividend receipt. Timeline within which NIB and NIPS will also make payment. That is one side of it. The other side of it is that every registrar and bank should have a desk managing unclaimed dividends. In which case, and that particular person will be responsible for tracking all mails. For example, they have customer relations service or what dedicated mail for that purpose. The assignment of that person is to go through that mail. All forms submitted on a daily basis must be tracked, must be processed within a particular time, and I am recommending a maximum of 3 days. It must be sorted out. With the BVN now, it's very simple. So if that is done, that would be one leg of it. The other leg is that on a monthly basis, the registrars must be submitting returns to SEC on it. To say we receive so number of unclaimed dividend application form. We have processed dash within so number of periods. If there are deviations, they need to explain the deviation, why it extended to 1 week, and so that we monitor that as much as possible. And if that is done, and CBN is also monitoring the banks on how they are coping with that, we'll be in a position to review and then try as much as possible to put in place additional measures to drive down this particular initiative. And currently, all companies, all listed companies and PSCs, I know for that for a fact, other than the AGMs that we had this year, whereby people could not gather, they are mandated to create the awareness at the AGM. You carry your banner to the AGM ground. The registrars are on ground to give you the form, to collect the form and process there and then. So that one is going on fine. But the more we do that, the more awareness we create, and also timeline, because anything that is not measured definitely will not improve. But if we have a timeline that we measure, definitely there will be improvement.
As the president of ICSAN, you've often been interested in what plays out in the public sector. How do you think the corporate governance structure has played out under this dispensation?
I'm interested for one simple fact. Nobody can clap with one hand. And
Okay.
both the public and the private sectors must work together for the upliftment of the economy. And that is why we should not be focusing only on the private sector. The enabling environment must be provided by the public sector. And that is why we encourage the public sector to also up their game. Here, in terms of corporate governance in the public sector space, there is big room for improvement. And what could have assisted would have been a code of governance for the public sector, which was initiated in 2016. It got to a stage before it was stopped because the public institution said that they had existing laws that the provisions of the code contradict those existing laws, and they will need to modify the laws in order for them to cope. So that was why this stopped. But pending when we have governance code for the public sector, there are a lot of things that could be done. If you look at the recent scandals we are having in the public sector, it's due to failure of governance. And you'll be surprised. So some of the agencies involved in this controversy, they have provisions that are shocking. If you check or go through the Niger Delta Development Commission Act, you'll be surprised that there is no provision for secretary. The managing director of the NDDC is the chief executive, is the accounting officer, is also the secretary. In the act, you'll be so. I have never seen that kind of legislation whereby the managing director is the one also taking charge, keeping records of the proceeding of the board, monitoring the secretariat of the board. So it shows that there is no control. When you have one person who is like a trinity, it creates a governance issue. And as much as possible, that is why, even in some other agencies where you have provisions dealing with this particular agency must have a secretary, the provisions or the guidelines are so porous in the sense that they just say that this commission shall have a secretary who shall be appointed by the governing council. There is no provision about the qualification, no provision on the experience, no provision about the reporting line, no provision on the role of the secretary. And unfortunately, they have forgotten that the secretary is the compliance officer for that agency. And unless you have a compliance officer who can say, the board, we cannot do this. Mr. Chairman or the governing members, you cannot do this because these are the limits. Then it creates a problem. And that is why we quickly need to review all acts, setting up agencies of government to ensure that they have provision for secretary, not only that provision alone, that particular provision must stipulate the qualification, the experience, the duties, the reporting lines, who is the secretary reporting to, and also procedure for removal. Because the beauty of the private sector as at now is that you cannot remove a company secretary at least, because the procedure and to be followed, the steps to be taken are well laid out. The reporting line are clearly laid out. The qualification and experience are clearly laid out that a person who will be a secretary of a public company must pass through the same procedure for the appointment of a director of that company. But in the public sector, we don't have that. And that is why we are having these issues.
Okay. Thank you very much for your input on the program, sir. Bode Ayeku is the president of Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria.
Thank you.
The federal government has issued a check of 162 billion naira from the sukuk offered last month for the construction of 44 critical projects across the country. At the handover ceremony to the Minister of Works and Housing in Abuja, the Director General of the Debt Management Office, Patience Oneha, explained how the third sovereign bond was oversubscribed.
Most of you as well will recall that the first sovereign sukuk for 100 billion naira was issued in September 2017. And this was followed by another in December 2018, also for 100 billion naira. With the issuance of the third sovereign sukuk, which is why we are here, the federal government has been able to raise a total of 362.577 billion through sukuk, all of which have been for the reconciliation and rehabilitation, rather, forgive me, and reconstruction of road projects across the 6 geopolitical zones of Nigeria.
That's it on the program tonight. Thank you for watching. I'm Edidion Iwang.